Hi, I'm Rick Maurer, and I'm really delighted to be on this show with Phil today. And just so you know who I am, I write about change management. In particular, I'm interested in two questions. Why do people support us, and why do they resist us? And I continue to write books about that and all that. So I want to tell you the best advice that I think I've ever gotten professionally was about 15 years ago. And I had three major consulting projects that if you had looked at those projects and looked at the proposals and the contracts, you go, wow, this is great. I mean, they looked like good work. They were lucrative. I mean, everything you would want. And I ended up hating all three of them. I mean, one of them, I had said yes to something that would have excited me 10 years before that, and it no longer excited me. And I didn't pick it up until way late in the process. And what I was doing was phoning it in. And I'm really embarrassed to say that, but I was. The other two were between management and labor, two very different situations. And they just were acting in bad faith. And basically, it was kind of like, well, if we bring this guy in, we say, well, we did everything we could do. We hired this guy. He's written books. And they didn't really want to do the things that they had to do. So I was saying to my wife, Kathy, and I said, look, maybe I'm not any good at this anymore. And she said, well, I don't think you've lost your skills in the last 6 months. Maybe you were never any good. And by the way, she knew that would get me to smile. We do not have a strained marriage by any means. And she said, look, a lot of guys your age are retired and you've just started playing music again. Why don't you back off from work a little bit and play more music? I mean, you really love it. And I didn't do that, but it was swirling around in my head. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Kim, and I told her the story. And she said, so why aren't you listening to your wife? And I said, well, I don't want to ever retire, but I want to know the money is there in case for some reason I changed my mind or I really had to do that. And she said, oh, how much more money do you need? And I said, I don't know. And she said, that'll keep you working. And I put together what Kim had said and what Kathy said, and ended up with doing something that I wish I had done years and years before that. And that was I decided I'm only going to take on projects that give me as much pleasure as music. And my horn is sitting like within arm's reach right here. Today, I will pick up the horn and practice for a couple of hours. And it's not the big gigs. I like playing big gigs once we can start playing gigs again, but I love practicing. I just love having the horn in my hands playing. And so when I get a call and say, hey, could you help us with? I'm really listening is not only am I a good fit for it, but am I a good fit for it from my standpoint too? Like, oh yeah, this would give me the same kind of pleasure that music does. So that's the best advice I ever got.
Awesome, Rick. That's great, man. So yeah, I mean, that's a great way to look through relationships. That's a great way to look through just about everything, right? Does it give us pleasure to do it or not? So that's really interesting as we talk about Carpe Possibility today, right? Seizing the possibility of what might be, which I think is really important for us to really consider. So, Rick, let's take us back, man. So I know you've written books, right? You play the horn. Talk to me though. How did this get started? Your interest in possibility and what might be.
Well, it actually started kind of by chance in graduate school. I'd gone to music school, and then in graduate school, I was studying in a program where I was going to go out and work in schools, and I was going to work with emotionally disturbed kids. These kids, who some psychologist had said they're disturbed. And the philosophy of this graduate program is, a lot of these kids aren't disturbed. It's the schools that are disturbed. And so your job really is to change the school system. And if you can change schools, you'll have fewer kids running around acting disturbed. I bought that then, and I still buy it. But when I got out of school, I got my first real job. And you can imagine, here I am, 25 years old. I walk in, I just gotten out of the Army, out of graduate school, and I walk into a school. Here's teachers who've been there 20, 30 years. And I go, hi, I'm here to help. And they go, well, that's really nice, young man. You sit right over there, and the moment we need help, we're going to ask for it. And every time I would come up with an idea that I, of course, thought was brilliant, it would go nowhere. And that started it. And as I was teaching, I would keep doing things and keep saying, how come they listen to other people and they don't listen to me? And after about 8 years of teaching, I had learned about the field of organization development, and so went back to school, was studying that. But that whole thing stayed with me: is how come some people are able to get their ideas across and others not? And that's what got it all going. And it's still, I think I've got some really good answers to that, but it's still a work in progress.
Wow.
No.
Wow, that's interesting. That ties nicely back to your whole, it's the school, and maybe I'm not so good, but I know that I am, and I've got insight here, right? I mean, even as a 25-year-old, I can only imagine how you still had value even though nobody was listening to you. So how did you crack that? Like, what was the first thing that you discovered there? Because that's so fascinating to me, because I started out going to school to teach, and I suffered from a lot the same, Rick.
Yeah. How did I discover it? Well, a big thing that happened is a lot of my clients were really, in the late 80s, were really saying, man, we're facing a lot of change and a lot of resistance and blah, 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 blah. What can we do about it? And so I started searching the business press, and I remember doing a literature search. This is back when you actually had literature and not Google. And I just typed in, like for Fortune and Wall Street Journal, the phrase resistance to change. And one word kept coming up, one verb, and it was to overcome. We need to overcome resistance. Now, I get the sentiment, but that actually works against it. In my experience of saying, I'm here to help, man, when you push back against resistance, you actually are inventing more resistance, And so, well, what do I mean, I've been studying Aikido and Tai Chi, both martial arts, that really use the energy of the other person. And so you're not, in fact, in Aikido, some schools of it, there are no attacking moves. You can't do an aggressive move. You can only do it in response. I was looking at that, and then I started studying at a place called the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. And the Gestalt approach to resistance is people resist for a good reason. We need to respect that. And if you respect it, and listen to it, people are far more likely to start breaking down some walls and starting saying, well, what about this? What about that? That doesn't mean people are a pushover, but it was a very different approach. And of course, they were talking in psychological language, and I realized my clients who were IT people and engineers would not like that. And so I started trying to translate it, and then ended up coming up with my own model, and was trying to prove it as I was working. And I found more and more this model I was coming up with was helping me, I hate to say get my foot in the door because I don't operate that way, but in conversations have more connection with people, and consequently, not only would they get more interested in what I was saying, I would tend to get more interested in what they were saying too, which really kind of goes against that. We got to overcome it. So if Phil will just shut up, I'm going to go ahead with my sales pitch here.
No, that's so interesting. I mean, the biggest thing that I heard from that is that people resist for a good reason. Mm-hmm. And it's our job, whether we're in sales or coaching or consulting, to find that reason out.
Yeah.
Right? So that we can actually be there for us or for them, right? So we can actually be present for them and be part of that. And it's interesting because if we get back to it, right? If we get back to what you said there, and the basis of your work, why do people support us and why do they resist us? I would say that people support us for a good reason as well. So as much as they resist, right? So talk to me about that. Let's talk about support, because we could talk about resistance all day and why that is.
Yes.
But let's use the positive energy here. Let's talk about support. So how do we help people be more open to supporting us? How do we get them, how do we trigger more energy, right? Because your new book, Seizing Moments of Possibility, is about triggering energy and forward momentum on this. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about triggering some of that energy, please, Rick.
Okay, good. Do you mind if I start with the negatives just real quick, and then I'll move to the positive?
Of course.
Okay,
Absolutely.
It'd be real quick. Okay. What I ended up coming up with are 3 levels of resistance. And I only say level because level 1 is the easiest to work with. And here's what they are. These phrases I got from my editor, Leslie Stephen, and they basically are, I don't get it, I don't like it, or I don't like you. And all 3 of those can work against you. And I can say more about that. But let me move to the positive side, which is your question, is each of those has a positive counterpart. So what we need if we're going to influence other people, whether it's on a big project or a tiny thing just between you and one other person, people need to understand what we're talking about. That's level one. They need to like it. And by that, I mean, they're leaning in. They're going, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. What about this? What about that? They're engaged with it. And the third is they have sufficient trust and confidence in you to say, oh, okay, I don't quite get it yet, but I trust this person enough. I'm going to keep listening because generally they're on a good track for something. And those three kind of energies are always alive, either working for you or against you, always. And so it's in our best interest to be paying attention to those three things. So for instance, let's say, since we can see each other, let's say I was trying to influence you right now. If I start talking and saying, well, you know, the basic of the theory is da 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 da, that's all level one. And if I start to see your eyes going, or you're looking at your watch and go, I hope this is over, it's a signal to me that maybe I made my point. Maybe it's something else going on. And so I can start looking at the I like it or I don't like it. And I go, what would interest this guy? And does he even know me well enough that he would have enough trust in me for me to be talking about something? So those kind of things are always in my mind. And so the resistance and support are in the dance between you and me. I'm not saying, well, you know, Phil, he scores a 3 on da da da. It's not that at all. It's what's going on in this little field, this little relationship between you and me, or you and 1,000 other people.
Ooh. So resistance and tension, right? The tension between I don't like it and I don't understand, right? We have to overcome that. We have to overcome the leaning in versus the I don't like it, and the trust and confidence versus the I don't like you. And that's so interesting because I agree with you that it's not about overcoming that. It's about understanding that, accepting that, and moving and trying harder maybe to do that. So to your point, let's break those three down because I think they're a key, and I do think they're really important and often misunderstood. So
yes.
First, I don't get it, right? I don't understand what the heck is this guy talking about. Let's start there. How do we do that without being condescending? How do we get people to understand without being like, hey, dummy, this is the stuff that I'm interested in. You should just listen to me.
Well, right there, I mean, that last phrase is absolutely key to that once I've explained something, if I'm doing it in clear English or whatever language you're using, if I start saying more than that, I run the risk of treating it. You'll start to say, does he think I'm an idiot? So what do I need to do to say, hey, this is the best way to get from here out to the airport, just so you get it. And so that's what I'm paying attention to. If I start doing more than that, I run the risk of losing you. So the ways to do it, I mean, you can have people in the audience, or you can, if you have enough trust, you can ask people. But one mistake we make is we figure, all right, if Phil's resisting, he must not have understood it. I'll explain it again. And this time I'll use clip art. And so we often, and with the best of intentions, we keep overdoing the selling part, the talking part. And so the big thing is just make your case and shut up. Or ask questions. Hey, what do you think about that? That kind of thing. So,
wow, those are things that often don't get done on sales calls. Often leaders don't do that because we fill the silence, right? We fill the silence with more noise instead of allowing people to process and to say, that's interesting, and then to ask a question themselves, or to your point, to ask them a question of, is this what you meant? Is this without so many words, right? Am I making myself clear without making you feel like an idiot? I think that's really, really key. Okay. Yeah. That's good. That's really good, man. So, thanks. Okay. So leaning in, right? It's easy if I'm looking at you, right? But if I turn my camera off and you can't see me, how do I know that you're leaning in? How do I know that you're not just like, well, I'm not really here, man?
Well, it's harder. But one thing you can do is, is cut down what you're saying into little bite-sized nuggets. And you might even say, so Rick, does that make sense? So, hey, I've been talking for a couple minutes. What questions do you have? And you might get questions. You might start to get pushback. So does this mean we're all going to lose our jobs? Does this mean, which is starting to go to level 2 thing, but leaving a lot of space, as you were suggesting, just leaving a lot of space, but with some invitation for people to engage during that space. So just asking a direct question. Hey, I'd really like to hear from you. Is this making sense to you? If not, where am I being unclear, or things like that. But all I'm looking for at that level 1 is, do you understand it? It doesn't mean you're going to buy it or that you like it. It's just you understand what I'm talking about. And so I ought to be able. I have to keep cutting myself back from what I'm saying. So,
which is so interesting. That's so interesting, right? Saying less actually says more, because we get people to really. To come in. I mean, your point there about leaving space for questions with an invitation for engagement, not just, shut up and think about it, but really think about it and tell me what you think. Like, give me some feedback. How is this working for you? What isn't clear? I think is really, really strong there. I really like that, Rick, and I think that's
cool.
Really powerful. Yeah. So now that we've got some understanding here, and we've got a little bit of leaning in, learning in, if you will, being engaged. Yeah. Now we get to the interesting part, and this is the trust and confidence. And I would, I know just from my experience, this is not something that happens in a conversation. This is something that happens over the lifetime of the relationship.
Yeah.
Right. This is something that builds over time. But how do we start the trust and confidence? How do we start that? I mean, do we read them our CV, or what's the way that we start this?
Yeah, that'd be the bad way. That's one way to do it, though. Well, first of all 3 of those are alive all the time. So I can't just start with facts and figures. I've got to be presenting it in a way. And let me tell you a quick story. I was working with a software development company. They were having an offsite retreat, and on Friday night they had a big gala thing. So a lot of people stayed up late and dancing and drinking. 8 o'clock Saturday morning, people had to make presentations to each other. And this one poor guy had the 8 a.m. slot. And I had nothing to do then. So I got up, got coffee, sat in the back of the room just to watch. And he starts presenting his idea. He clearly had thought it through his presentation. But during the entire 45 minutes, he was looking at his computer screen, and they could see the slides projected. He never looked up. And what he missed was, and that's a guy who really spent time preparing to make it clear, but he missed that, like, the guy in front of me was doing a crossword puzzle in the paper. Other people were moving to the back of the room to get coffee and pastries at 8 o'clock in the morning. That makes sense. But they stayed there and they started holding conversations, whispering. And because he's so much just looking at his screen, he's missing all of that. Now, what he could have done, when I talk about like seizing moments of possibility, is if he had just put a note into himself after 5 minutes, stop and say, hey, so what do you think so far? Or, hey, folks, I'm really excited about this, but I know it's Saturday morning. Are you with me or not? You could joke about it, but you need that feedback loop, because what happened at the end of it, he said, well, that's it. What questions do you have? And there was nothing. And I remember he folded up his laptop and walked off. And I suspect the guy never had an idea what hit him. And the data was right in front of him. I mean, it was saying, bam, this is not going over. And it wasn't that he wasn't prepared, but he was prepared with his message and not prepared with engaging with the audience. So the more we can do that, the better off we are, I think.
That's funny. Yeah. Being intentional about adding in some feedback loop time is a great way for new presenters and new leaders to really see what's going on and to see if what we're saying is resonating. And that is about saying less. That is about being present for that. Because I'll tell you, we used to call those the hangover session, Rick. It'd be the day after the conference party. When I was in corporate, it'd be like, you got the 8 or 8:30 slot, the breakfast bite at 7:15 after the conference party, and people are like, Yeah, I'm here, but and if you didn't engage, if you didn't ask, if you weren't present with them, the 7 people that did show up never heard you again because you were dead to them, right? And that's
Yes,
so
exactly.
wow, wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. That's so
And the sad
interesting.
thing, and it sticks with me because I've made the same mistake. And the good news is that if we just step back, there are, I would say, literally hundreds of little moments of possibility when we could stop and ask a question, or we could really pay attention to, there's a lot of side conversations, or I seem to be losing them there. I mean, it's, man, if we're just focused on the data, it's like we've got this narrow laser-like vision and we're missing all the stuff that's going on around us. So,
Wow, wow. That's so right on. That's so interesting because I've made that mistake too. I've been the presenter at the Hangover Session and failed miserably as well.
yeah,
And I hope I've learned from that. I do a lot more presentations now, so
yeah,
that's fun. So and one of the things you talk about in the book, I think, will kind of blend it together, if you will, and that is the whole idea of thinking like a barista. I really
yeah.
think that's such a powerful idea here. So talk to us about how we do that as a leader, as a salesperson, as someone who needs to get our ideas through.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I think the barista thing is important is, well, I thought of it, so it's, of course it's important. The reason I think it's important is that often we think, okay, I need to make my case, level one, blah 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 blah, and what we really need, and so what happens, like with change management or something big, there are so many details involved that we lose sight of the human part of it. Not because we're bad people, but we're just so busy. There's so many forms to fill out, so many things to get done. And what I think we should do is think of ourselves as good baristas. Now, my local coffee shop just reopened. I'm very, very happy. And I'll go down there and I'll get in line and there'll be somebody who orders a latte. And I've never heard anybody say, hey, give me a latte, but hold the milk. Because you can't do that. A latte is a blend of steamed milk and espresso. And when they're blended together well by a good barista, you can't tell where the coffee ends and the milk begins. It's this seamless blend of goodness. And that's what I believe our strategy should be, whether it's just you and me talking with each other or we're trying to influence 1,000 people in person or on Zoom or whatever, is how do we blend it together and not make it an add-on? Yeah, and on Friday we're going to have pizza. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but the point is, how do we make this dreary meeting we're having on a Tuesday actually come to life? So that's for me, that's the key of it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Blend it all together, right? Bring it to life and don't let people know where it starts, where it ends, and just be one. I dig that a lot. So as we're going here, I enjoyed the book, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about that energy, though, because coffee is energy to me, but it's false energy. So how do we insert real energy into these meetings without seeming hokey, right? Because I'll tell you, Rick, personally, when people first met me, I had one of my dear friends who thought I was like a Pollyanna because I'm high energy all the time. That's just who I am. But
Yeah.
how do we help people see that and inject that energy without injecting that coffee energy, right? Without seeming fake.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we do that? I just need to collect my thoughts on that. One thing that really helps is I actually talk in the book about these pockets of energy, and the first one is really important, and that is that people feel a sense of urgency for what you're talking about. So if they don't feel a sense of urgency, then you're talking about the details of what it's going to look like, and all of that doesn't make any sense. You're already trying to engage them. You're trying to engage them at a point where they aren't. They're going, why is he talking about this? This isn't important. So for instance, if it's a sales call and I'll say, hey, I'm glad you had a couple minutes to talk, Phil. I got this phone for sale. And you're thinking, I just bought a new phone. And this phone is great. I mean, and it does blah, blah. And I'm going into the features and benefits. And not only that, you don't even have to be on the call. It'll talk itself. It's just blah, blah, blah. And you're just not paying attention because you got a phone already. There's no urgency. But if you just lost your phone down a drain during a storm and I go, hey, I sell phones, you go, really? So we need to somehow to be addressing, I've never told that story before. I like it. I like your reaction. Thank you. That we need to be willing and have ways to get people as either as excited or as afraid as we are to say, God, yeah, what are we going to do about that? Because you can get other people saying, what are we going to do about that? And I'd be glad to give a couple of examples, but that's what I would do.
Well, let's definitely give some examples. But one of the things I want to share on that, because I know urgency is a great driver for decision making, but we have to remember that it's not our urgency as the deliverer, but it's your urgency as the receiver. That's the most important thing. So finding out, to your point about, I don't get it, helping them understand what they're talking about and connect that to something that's important to them is really important and really a key to helping, take that energy from me and this problem suck and I want to get you off the phone to, hey, Rick, let's spend some time together. Let's solve this problem. So give me an example or two of that, please.
Yeah. Let me give you a corporate example and then a sales example. There was a period in, about 20 years ago in the States where a lot of healthcare institutions were turning into profit-making entities. And that was a very different mindset than being a community service. And I was working in a small hospital, and they were part of a 12 hospital system located around the United States. And changes just seemed to be going really well there. I mean, they had the same pressures everybody else did. And I was talking to the CEO one day, and I said, am I on track here? I mean, you're just not getting resistance. I mean, people seem to be with you on stuff. Are you not facing the same problems? And he said, oh, no, we face exactly the same problems. And I said, so what's going on? And he said, well, two things. He said, one, as CEO, I'm invited to meetings all the time. My calendar is filled with meetings. And my only criteria for saying yes is you got to give me the last 3 or 4 minutes to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And people always say, yeah. And he said, what I do is I'm not trying to sell them anything. I'm trying to say, hey, this is what I'm paying attention to. This is what's keeping me awake at night. Hey, I don't know if you noticed in the paper this morning, the hospital down the road is building a new cardiac wing. I don't know what implication that's going to have on us, but it's got my attention. It's that kind of stuff. And then every 3 months, everyone affiliated with the hospital got a 1-page quarterly report. And it was just 3 graphs. How are we doing on patient outcomes, the percentage of people who get better? How are we doing on client service? Are people happy with us or not? Which is independent from getting better or not. I mean, you could get better and go, man, but I never want to go back there again. And then the third one is financial performance. And then they're compared to the other hospitals in their own system. And then I think it was Gallup had survey for the whole country, and you could see how you were doing. So there weren't a lot of bullet points, or it was just graphs. And the executives usually have that data. But when you give it to the people who work in the cafeteria and the surgeons and the people who draw blood, was unusual. And he said, here's what's amazing, is not only do people know what's going on, people started coming to me saying, hey, we're worried about our customer service scores. They're going down and everybody else's is going up. And we were wondering about that. So we did a little checking. We think we found out why, and we have a suggestion. So instead of resisting change because they're getting that same sense of urgency, they're coming to the leader and saying, hey, we really need to pay attention to this. Here's how we think we should do it. And the guy said, yeah, absolutely. So there's a real power in bringing people in and letting them see, wow, look what's going on. Good news and bad news.
Yeah, well, that gets really back to your 3 points that you talked about there. But first, you've got to understand what we're talking about. There's 3 points that are most important to an executive, right? Profitability, of course, right? Let's be clear. Always important. But customer sat, patient sat, client sat, whatever, satisfaction matters. And then also, right, did we actually fix the problem? Like, did we deliver on our
Yes.
promise? And that's often the one that gets missed. But I love the simplicity of that, because if that's all you're talking about, if those are the three things every quarter, every month, every day, every meeting, here we go, bang, 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 every time, this is it.
Yep.
And then here's, I'm paying attention to this because it likely relates to that. Then people lean in. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's it. Right now, I'm engaged.
Yeah, and what you helped me remember is, one, the beauty of the simplicity of that, and the simplicity isn't three dinky little points. There are three key things that drive a business.
Big rocks. Yep.
Yes, yeah, and just the power of that, and how it gets reinforced is something that's just missing in a lot of places, and it's absolutely avoidable. But you got to trust people with information. By the way, I want to give a sales example. Neil Rackham wrote a book a number of years ago called Spin Selling, and he got hired by some company. Said, I want you to follow our best salespeople around, and I want you to find out their closing techniques. So for any of your viewers who aren't in sales, a closing technique is, what are your things you're closing to try to get the people to buy? So how many of these cups would you like today? That kind of thing. And there's hundreds of them, and a lot of them have names and that. And it's been around since probably the early part of the 20th century. So he followed the better salespeople around, and he gets together with the executives, and he says, so what did you learn? And he said, they don't use closing techniques. He said, no. He said, what did they do? And he said, I told you what they do. They go in, they ask a lot of questions, they are creating relationships, but they don't try to close a sale. And he got fired. But from that, he said, no, I'm on to something. And he ended up kind of creating his own business and writing this book, which I think is brilliant. And the better salespeople, I'm not talking about you need to buy a new toaster and you need it by tomorrow morning, and you say you're going to go out, and then that's a different thing. But it's the kind of big thing that people go, it's that big thing where the relationship and really listening to what they need, as well as what you're trying to deliver, really makes a huge difference. And better salespeople will go, well, yeah, that's what you do. But I'm amazed at how many salespeople don't do that, and also how many change people forget that kind of wisdom that we could learn from the better salespeople. So.
I love that. And I totally agree. It's about listening. It's about sharing back. It's about reflecting. It's about leaning in, right? And giving our energy to the solution instead of the problem in many cases, and helping people get there so that they can develop that trust and that confidence. Yeah. Because sometimes the solution isn't available, right? Sometimes the real solution we don't have access to. Sometimes we just have to take a step towards it, and we don't always get the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So that's so interesting. A lot of stuff there. A lot of stuff there, Rick. I really dig that. I really enjoy this is what I'm paying attention to. The leaving space for questions. I think that's really important. The big thing that I'm getting from you here today is that we really have to understand why people are either resisting or why they're open to the change, so that we can be with them. So how do we seize it, Rick? How do we, how do we carpe possibility as we're in this home, man? How do we seize the possibility that's in front of us and actually embrace the change and make things better?
Okay. Well, unless you're doing it already, I would say start small. I would start with tweaking what you're already doing. I mean, there are consultants who will say, oh, we're going to bring hundreds of people together and do da-da-da-da-da. And some of that can be really valuable. But if you haven't done that before, that's not the place to start. So what I would start with is that meeting you got on the schedule tomorrow morning, and you go, oh, it's Wednesday again, or whatever, and we got to do that meeting. Why is it so deadly? And what's one little thing that you could do that might make a difference in energy without making big changes? You're not going to change the hall. You're not going to bring in pizza. You're not going to do any big thing. But what's a tiny thing you could do without adding time to the meeting? So, for instance, we never leave time for question and answer. Or we never really have a call to action at the end of the meeting saying, okay, so we've decided A, B, and C. So by the next time we meet, we're going to have made this kind of progress and that kind of progress. That kind of call to action, which is essential. Or it might be, in those meetings, I do 90% of the talking. What if I make sure that I only talk for X number of minutes and then leave it open for questions or to hear from other people? I mean, and what I would do is start small so it can be an experiment. So if it doesn't work, there's no harm done. But you're starting to get comfortable, hopefully, with this notion of engaging people in a little bit different way. And if you have a lot of guts, just ask somebody over a cup of coffee, say, hey, what do you what could we do to make that meeting just a little bit better? I honestly, I would start right there. I would actually start before that. I would start with what Yogi Berra, the great philosopher and he played baseball too, I hear, said is you can observe a lot just by watching. And I would just start today by going into a meeting, if you're not the one in charge, and watching energy. Just watching it. It's fun to watch other people, dig holes for themselves. And it's also fun to see, wow, how come when Phil's speaking, people are taking notes, they're literally leaning forward. What's he doing? What's going on there? And so that's a great place to start. And then I would start just by these little tweaks before you ever go into the really big things, because you can just get really scared really quickly if it's this big thing and man, there's just too much writing on it. So.
Wow. Great tips to bring us home, Rick. You start small, first by watching, paying attention, taking notes, observing what's there. Be like Yogi Berra, right? I love that. Really cool. And then think about one thing you can change in the next meeting that you dread. How can you change the energy without adding time to the meeting? I really, really love that, Rick. That's a great way to take us home here. Your book is fantastic, by the way. Congratulations on that. If you want to get to know Rick Maurer, visit rickmaurer.com. That's MAURER.com. You can get his book. He's giving it away for free, if you can believe that. Seizing Moments of Possibility. It's fantastic. Easy read, applicable read, which is what I love. Rick, but if you had a favorite place, if people want to give you feedback, if they want to connect with you more, where would you like them to go?
Sure. Well, two things. One, I have an account on LinkedIn, and if you do Rick Maurer, you'll get it. There, I think there's another Rick Maurer, but you'll see my picture. It's not a hard one. It's not a common name. It's not hard to find. The other thing is they could just do rick@rickmaurer.com and an email would get right to me.
Cool. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing some of your energy today, my friend. I learned a lot. I know we shared a lot, and hopefully we added some urgency for folks so that they can understand that it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it does take a lot of attention to shift the energy and to Carpe Possibility. Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. This has been great. I've really had a great time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.